In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, October 20th, 2023. A long day for us here at Judging Freedom, but one of my favorite parts of the day, because it's the end of the day, and one of my favorite parts of the week where I answer questions that you've sent. And there's a bunch in the queue already, but this one caught my attention. So I don't know if your name is Jay Luke or Luke J, but Jay, you said, what you said about Lincoln last week was something I've never heard nor expected to hear, but I thought it was thought-provoking and interesting. And then you responded and said I had to replay it and make my girlfriend listen to it. Well, what I said about Lincoln last week was objective fact. If you're interested in Lincoln, I'm going to hide my face. This is the book, The Problem with Lincoln by Tom DiLorenzo. Professor DiLorenzo, who's an economic historian, has written about 4 or 5 books on Lincoln. This one, The Problem with Lincoln, summarizes the others and adds some new materials. But the historical facts remain the same. Treason in the Constitution is defined as giving aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States or waging war against them. Them meaning the states. So Lincoln engaged in an act of treason by waging war against the states. That's to start with. Lincoln also did things that no other leader had ever done in the history of the world, which is to attack civilians and attack their property. When General Sherman marched through Georgia, he burnt courthouses, robbed banks, raped women, killed children, and basically destroyed society in the state of Georgia and to a certain extent in South Carolina to the ground. This is the first time that it happened in the history of the United States, and of course, the first time it happened in the history of the world. Now it's considered common play, as we know from what's going on in Israel and Hamas and Russia and Ukraine, for military tacticians to target civilians. But prior to the American war between the states, there's no historical record of this happening by the head of state of an organized government. There obviously were marauders and pirates and crazy people who did this, but not an organized government. I've also said that if you read the Emancipation Proclamation, you'll see that it did not free the slaves everywhere. It purported to free them only in certain states, but it recognized slavery. I condemn slavery, but it recognized slavery in the border states because Lincoln was trying to woo the politicians in the border states into returning to the Union. And if he had purported to declare slavery unlawful there, it would have exploded in his face. Was the Civil War fought about slavery? Not at all. Slavery became an issue in the last year of the Civil War after the Emancipation Proclamation. By what authority did Lincoln issue it? By his authority as commander-in-chief. He basically said, I'm freeing the slaves so that they can join the military. Look, slavery was on its way out. It wouldn't have been necessary to kill 750,000 people. That's the number of people that died in the American Civil War, more than Americans died in all other wars combined. But Lincoln was a fanatic, determined to maintain the stability of the Union at all costs. When the Alien and Sedition Acts were written, now I'm back to 1798, which made it a crime to criticize the government, there were 2 anonymous pieces written against it. One was called the Kentucky Resolution, and the other was called the Virginia Resolution. And both resolutions were adopted by the legislatures of Virginia and Kentucky, and they both said We voluntarily joined the Union. We can voluntarily leave. Now, you might say, well, what crackpots wrote that stuff? Well, the Virginia Resolution was written by James Madison, who wrote the Constitution. The Kentucky Resolution was written by Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. It is very, very clear that at the time the states joined the Union, they all assumed that they could leave voluntarily. We also know this is true because 5 of the states joined conditionally, saying we will leave if you don't add a Bill of Rights protecting our citizens from the federal government. And so the first thing the Congress did when it came into existence was to draft the Bill of Rights and to send it to the states, and it was ratified unanimously just in a couple of weeks' time. Who drafted the Bill of Rights? James Madison, same guy that wrote the Constitution, and that 5 years later, or 7 years later, pardon me, would write the Virginia resolutions. So the idea that the states can undo voluntarily what they did voluntarily was well accepted throughout the United States up until Lincoln decided to kill people who disagreed with that. But if you want to read more, Tom DiLorenzo is the country's leading academic authority. There's lots of negative stuff about Lincoln, but Tom DiLorenzo, a good friend of mine, Professor DiLorenzo, is the country's leading academic authority on the problem with Abraham Lincoln. Patrick Jean-Claude. Patrick's a regular writer, and your thoughts are very appreciated, Patrick. Judge, with our politicians at sleep, the war in Israel, Iran helping terrorists, what is the status on the Iran nuclear program ambitions? Who's checking on this before it's too late? Thank you and Godspeed. Thank you for the Godspeed, Patrick. I wish it to you and your family as well. I don't know who's checking on it. The Biden administration, actually the Obama administration, negotiated an agreement with Iran that it would stop developing nuclear weapons. And then the Trump administration abrogated the agreement, and then the Biden administration put the agreement back into place. Where it stands now, I don't know. Unfortunately, the Hamas attack on Israel and Israel's response to that attack has changed everything. I mean, everything in the Middle East. As you may have just heard from our guest today, Colonel McGregor, Professor Sachs, Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, Scott Horton, the whole landscape, the whole political landscape in the Middle East, which, Patrick, getting back to your question, includes Iran, has changed radically. The UN has taken the position that only it can decide who owns nuclear weapons, and it has authorized the United States, France, Great Britain, Russia, China, India, and Pakistan. Period. Does Israel have a nuclear weapon? Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask Bibi Netanyahu, he's going to tell you no. But we all know that even though Israel doesn't acknowledge it and Israel hasn't been authorized by the UN, it has one. So if Israel can have one unauthorized by the UN, can Iran? Is Israel a superior society to Iran? I mean, these are questions that have to be answered before the United States can be in the business of trying to stop another country from having a nuclear weapon with which to defend itself by threatening its enemies. I'm not sure if I have answered your question, Patrick, but I have done my best to do so. Alexander, what system is failing that allows a corrupt few to get into power, hold on to it indefinitely, bleed their nation dry, and drag the world into the abyss? Who should be responsible for this but fails? I suppose ultimately, Alexander, the American public is responsible for allowing the government to do what it does. I mean, we have a constitution. The purpose of the Constitution is twofold: to constitute, to establish the federal government, and to limit it. I'll quote Jefferson, to chain it down. Regrettably, from and after Lincoln and the war between the states, those chains have been broken, and the federal government has radically changed. So before the Civil War, we had the Madisonian model. And then we had a very prosperous period from the Civil War to World War I. I've often believed, Colonel McGregor said this earlier today, it was the most prosperous period in American history. There was no income tax. There was no heavy regulation by the federal government. We only fought one relatively minor war, but the scientific revolution was going on as it was understood at the time. And millionaires were popping up all over the place, not based on debt, but based on hard work and ingenuity. Build a better mousetrap and people will come to your door to buy it. After World War I, we had the Wilsonian model. So what's the difference between the Madisonian model and the Wilsonian model? Okay, Madisonian, as in James Madison, says of the federal government, it can only do that which is expressly authorized in the Constitution. Soon I'm going to be giving a course on the Constitution, and we'll go through the various sections of it. And you'll see the powers that have been given to the federal government by the Constitution and how limited they are. So Madisonian, the federal government can only do that which is expressly given to it in the Constitution. Wilsonian, as in Woodrow Wilson, is the opposite. Just turn it on its head. The Wilsonian model is the federal government can do whatever there is a national political will for it to do, except that which is prohibited to it by the Constitution. We still have the Wilsonian model today. I'll repeat the two because these terms may be new for those of you that haven't studied legal history or legal philosophy or haven't had the chance to have a basic course on the Constitution, which, as I said, you'll soon be able to get here. The Madisonian model, the guy who wrote the Constitution, the federal government can only do that which is expressly authorized in the Constitution. The Wilsonian model, the federal government can do whatever there's a national political will for, except that which is prohibited to it in the Constitution. I'll give you an example. During World War I, Wilson repressed dissent very aggressively. Now, a few years before he was president of the United States, he was president of Princeton University, my alma mater. After being president of Princeton, he was the governor of New Jersey. He was only the governor of New Jersey for 18 months when he was elected president. And while he was president of the United States, there was a draft for World War I, an utterly useless, horrific, destructive war that the United States should have had nothing to do with it. But Wilson had this crazy idea we can make the world safe for democracy, to use his phrase. And so 2 million American boys fought in Europe. There was a draft. Some of his former students at Princeton went to the local draft office in New Jersey, which was in Trenton, New Jersey, and they stood in front of the office and they read aloud the Declaration of Independence. Now, if you can read anything aloud in the United States, it's the Declaration of Independence, authored by Thomas Jefferson, adopted unanimously by the Continental Congress, the sheet anchor of our revolution against Great Britain. Wilson sent the precursor to the FBI. They were federal agents. It wasn't called the FBI at the time, to arrest these people for interfering with the draft. At a press conference, he was asked, how can you do this? The Constitution guarantees free speech. And he said, oh, no, read the First Amendment. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And he goes, that's right. I'm not the Congress. I can do anything for which there is political will. Only the Congress is prohibited from interfering with the freedom of speech. That's the Wilsonian model. By the way, that argument, if made today on a law school exam, you'd flunk it. Because today, the First Amendment doesn't read, but means no government may interfere with the freedom of speech. Federal, state, local, executive, legislative, or judicial. Nobody in the government can interfere with the freedom of speech. Very topical today, because you're going to see a lot of interference with people's free speech as they express opinions, sometimes radical, but opinions nevertheless, on the Israeli-Hamas war and on the Russia-Ukraine war. Where will you see this suppression? You'll probably see it on college campuses. Well, aren't those private? Yes. But because they accept federal funds for research and for scholarships, they're held to the same standards as the government. So you'll see a lot of court cases coming up very soon where a college administration has punished somebody for expressing an unpopular opinion, and the person whose opinion was suppressed will be filing a lawsuit. Expect to see that coming. Good question. I got kind of off the path there. Looking for another one here that might be of general interest. Okay, mole or mole. Judge, in the U.S. government, internal legal system or constitution, is there any legal basis or lawful reasoning to arrest a sitting president? Well, believe it or not, it was lawful to arrest a sitting president up to the time of the Civil War. There was no Department of Justice. When the government needed crimes to be prosecuted, the states prosecuted the crimes. That was Madison's genius. There were federal laws, but they would be prosecuted by the states. That would keep the federal government, again, chained down to the Constitution. By the way, there are only two federal laws authorized by the Constitution: treason, which I talked about in explaining Lincoln, giving aid and comfort to enemies of the United States or waging war against them, or debasing the money supply. In those days, the money supply was gold and silver. If you clipped a coin and took some of the gold and silver out of it and then melted it down and held it out as the same value as it was before you clipped it, that's debasing the money supply. That's another crime authorized by the Constitution. Okay, can presidents be arrested? From and after the administration of Ulysses S. Grant, which is right after the Civil War, which is when we first got a Justice Department. The Justice Department issued an opinion saying the president can't be arrested no matter what he does. From and after the Watergate era, there are three opinions on this. Two say he cannot be arrested. One says he can. The one that says he can be prosecuted. The two that say he can't be arrested say he can't be prosecuted. But all three of these modern opinions, I'm not talking about back in the Ulysses S. Grant days, but in the Nixon era, all three of those opinions say if the statute of limitations has not expired, the president can be arrested after he is no longer president, even for something he did while he was president. I mean, that brings us to Trump. Trump says not only can he not be arrested, he can't be prosecuted. Well, he's right. He can't be prosecuted for the exercise of his official government power. But if he exercises it corruptly, and that's going to be up to a jury to decide, then he can be prosecuted. If he wantonly and corruptly, that is for no legitimate government purpose, exposed national security secrets at Mar-a-Lago, if he corruptly, that is for no legitimate government purpose, talked people into claiming they were the legitimate electors from Georgia when in fact they weren't, he probably is not protected for that, or that's at least the way the courts will rule if they're consistent with rulings in the past. So a long answer: can't be arrested today while sitting president, but can be arrested after he leaves office for something he did while the president. Good question. Thank you for it. Judge, how do we stop Biden from taking us to war? Very, very profound question and very difficult to do. Why? Well, in the Nixon administration, when Nixon bombed Cambodia, remember the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which we now know was based on false intelligence. The incident in the Gulf of Tonkin never occurred, but Congress thought it occurred. They thought that an American ship had been fired on by the North Vietnamese, and so they authorized LBJ to fight a limited war against North Vietnam. Nixon succeeds LBJ and he begins bombing Cambodia. So Congress enacts the War Power Resolution, which basically says the president can fight any war he wants for 90 days. He's got to tell Congress. If Congress says no, he's got another 90 days to wind it down. Nixon vetoed that because he felt it crimped his style. Nixon was of the view that the president could start any war on his own, as long as he could argue it was in national security interest. Congress said no. Okay, so the War Powers Resolution is still law today. In my view, it's unconstitutional, not for the reason that Nixon vetoed it when he said it crimps his style, but because it takes some of Congress's power to declare war and gives it to the president. Can Congress give its power away to the president? Can Congress give its power away to the judicial branch? The Supreme Court's been very clear and said no. However, it has not ruled on this express giveaway. So Joe Biden could take us to war, a full-fledged war with hundreds of thousands of troops on his own for 90 days. He has to inform the Congress, and thereafter he's got to get Congress's consent. If they order him to bring the troops back, he can veto that order. If they override the veto by 2/3, he'll be forced to bring them back. If he refuses, I suppose they would impeach him. But we have given way too much power to presidents, particularly in war making. Madison, again, the drafter of the Constitution, could not have been clearer. If the president can both make war, decide who to attack, and wage war, decide how to attack, then he's not a president, he's a prince. And you might as well put a loaded gun in his desk drawer and let him shoot it at anybody he wants. Not my words, but the words of the author of the Constitution. So they were painfully clear about separating the power to choose targets from the power to wage war. The president is the commander-in-chief of the military in wartime, but the Congress decides with whom we're at war. Can Congress declare war against anybody it wants? No, because we have signed treaties saying we can only declare war on another country whose military is posing an immediate threat to the national security of the United States. Can the U.S. declare war on Russia? No. Russia poses no threat to the United States. We pose a threat to Russia because of the $100 billion, with a B, dollars in military equipment we have sold and sell, given to the Ukrainians to shoot and kill Russian boys. So it's a very ticklish and dangerous problem that the president has this authority. I'll tell you a story. When Barack Obama announced while he was in a trip to Brazil that we were bombing Libya, he did so while Congress was on spring break. Did you know Congress gets spring break like high schools and colleges and law schools? Okay, Congress gives itself a spring break. They should take more breaks. Your property and your liberty is safer when Congress is not in session. Another argument for another time. And I was interviewing on Fox Congressman Charlie Rangel, longtime Harlem congressman, a real character. Those of us in New York knew him and liked him, whatever you think of his politics. And I said, well, how can he do this under the War Powers Resolution? He has to inform Congress that he's using the military to bomb Libya. He wasn't using the military. He was using the CIA. And the War Powers Resolution only requires congressional authorization after 90 days when you use the military. Why didn't they think of that in 1973? Because they didn't realize that the president had at his disposal a private army which the author of the CIA, President Harry Truman, would condemn and denounce in 1963, shortly before he died, saying, I never intended this. Okay, I never intended to be talking as long as I have for 24 minutes now. It's a pleasure. I love the questions. I'm a professor at heart. As I said, you'll be learning soon how to do this. I'm going to be teaching 3 courses on the Declaration of Independence, on the Constitution of the United States, on the Bill of Rights, right here on Judging Freedom, and you'll learn soon how to sign up. And speaking of signing up, thank you for signing up. We're up to 216,000 subscriptions. You know our goal. It's 250,000 by Christmas. At the rate we've been going since Labor Day, we will meet and beat it thanks to you. Keep watching, keep listening, keep telling your friends. Have a great weekend. You know what we do here at Judging Freedom. we look out for your liberty.